now.
Sorry, is that okay with you, Derek, just to double check?
Yeah, you nodded.
Yeah, grand.
Yeah, did get a nod, yeah. And I think that's everything from me. So just to hand over to Claire.
Thank you, and thanks very much. And I just want to start by welcoming everybody, and welcome to all the carer reps. These are all carer reps on local IJBs who give their time a lot on a voluntary basis. So this is one of many meetings for them, as well as juggling caring roles and lots of other things they've got going on in their lives. We've had a number of apologies today, which kind of reflect this. Other IJB meetings today, caring duties, hospital appointments, various other things. But I'm very glad to welcome the care reps who've made it today. I also want to give a big welcome to Derek Feeley. We've already had the pleasure of welcoming Derek to our AGM last week, and that was a really interesting and useful conversation. So I'm really glad to be carrying on that conversation today, perhaps with a slightly different focus. So the agenda for today is quite simple. We're going to start with a presentation, and we've brought together some key messages, which as a group you really wanted Derek to hear. We had a previous meeting a few weeks ago, we had workshops and we looked at what messages we wanted to give today. So that presentation is going to be given by Peter Burke. Peter Burke is the carer rep in Angus and is also the carer rep on COSLA's Health and Social Care Board. So I'm going to hand over to Peter now for the presentation.
Good. Thanks, Claire. Yes, welcome, Derek. Good to see you again. This is I think it's the third time in about 5 days. So we're going to be giving you a short presentation about some information about carers, how the COVID-19 has impacted them, and basically how carer reps feel about working on the IJB, and then a few messages. There'll be messages dropped throughout the session, which is one of the reasons we're taping it. If we look at the first slide, some basic facts about carers, Jenny. There are now estimated, well, it's 1.1 million unpaid carers in Scotland, 400,000 on top of the existing 700,000 that were before COVID. This compares with something like 250,000 professional staff. The value of care is about 36 billion. And the 2020 cost for the NHS is something like 14.3 billion. But the value of carers is still 2.5 times that of the amount spent on the NHS. And I think it's probably no overstatement to say that if carers down tools today, the fabric of society would be severely tested. The conclusion is we're indispensable and should be viewed as equal. Why not? Will be viewed as equal expert and partners in care. So the next slide is the impact of caring. This is before COVID. Fewer than 10% of carers received carers allowance, and we'll be coming back to that on the next slide. More than half of carers said they were struggling. They had poor mental health, reduction of support due to austerity as much as anything, and a vast majority said they were lonely or isolated. Next slide, please, Jenny. So the impacts of caring, well, apart from the increase in the number of carers, there is the risk of redundancy. A large number reported on their mental and physical health. Fewer than 10% of carers received the COVID-19 additional payment, which means that 90% didn't, which is something like, I think it was 730,000 carers did not receive the extra money. But I would point you to a new report that was issued, I think it was today or early this week, which was called Caring Behind Closed Doors 6 months on, and it's from Carers UK. Of particular interest to us is page 28. I haven't read the rest, but I read page 28, which has a couple of recommendations for the Scottish Government, including passing money through local authorities or carers centres to those carers who are not receiving carers allowance. So again, back to the slide, 66 had no break from caring. We asked over 130 carers in Angus what their emotional state was. And on the right-hand side, you can see the word cloud that came up. And that's obviously not getting any better with what appears to be wave 2 coming through. So the next slide is the impact. The reason why people are stressed and lonely and isolated is because they're doing many things. On the left is the word cloud when we ask people what they did, and this is what they do most of the time. They're supervising, they're advocating, they're dressing, they're nursing, they're juggling careers, caring with other children, parenting, and volunteering and other things. One of the points about assessments is that we are asked time after time after time to fill in forms, even though the condition of the people we care for isn't changing. You know, no one wakes up in the morning and says, oh, I think I've just got over that cerebral palsy, I'm feeling fine. Why can't there be some central database? The carers enter the information and then they give authority to other people who want it, other departments who want the information on a regular basis. The bottom point about many carers working in health and social care is that a number of them move into that because they have relatives who need care. And that's something that struck me very early on in my caring career. So, next slide. The Ministerial Steering Group did an assessment, asked for an assessment of IJBs back end of last year, I guess. These are what we felt about the way that IJBs were looking after carers. We don't expect everybody to be exemplary, but we do expect everybody, if at least the vast majority, to be fully established after, what, 4 years of IJBs running. So that's not happened, unfortunately. We're putting pressure on this group. The Carers Collaborative is able to put pressure on collectively and individually, which is good. It's not all bad because after you left our meeting on at the COSLA meeting on Friday, COSLA agreed to endorse a paper that we had written, the collaborative had written, which means that IJBs are now being encouraged to use best practice and include carers on the equality impact assessments. We're trying to get it formalized, but that's not happened. But we will keep trying with that. But again, someone has said in that meeting, they said, well, surely the Scottish government should be doing this. They should be working with the UK government to include carers as protected characteristics. And if not, then the Scottish government could possibly bring forward their own legislation. So that's a point maybe that you could take on board. So next slide. We come up with a snappy little acronym panel, which is all about carers and their human rights, as well as having rights under the Carers Act itself. So carers and IJB are non-voting and often feel ignored, not always, but often feel ignored. And we don't get replacement care, we don't get short breaks, which makes succession planning for carers' participation very, very difficult. Carers Act and STS legislation has not been fully or consistently implemented. I know you're very aware of this. Non-discrimination, access to people in rural communities and for the ethnic minorities is a problem as well. One thing that struck me, and I've just had a brief conversation with Claire about it, is it seems to me that carers are about the only group of people who are providing, if you like, a service, who don't have any form of tribunal or ombudsman they can appeal to. If they feel they've been wronged, they can take it to the council, they can take it to the IJB. Beyond that, it doesn't go anywhere, it can't go anywhere. and surely there should be an ombudsman for carers, off care or something similar. So, final slide, please. We'd like to be acknowledged. We think we should be acknowledged as equal expert partners in care. I know this second point is something that we're pushing against at Open Door with you. We have people in the middle, not systems and not targets. Social care is a human rights issue. The point that's come up several times is that people like carers centres should be able to provide early intervention and prevention, so we don't get the emotional problems that are shown on that slide and which have been highlighted in the Carers UK report, which is stress and isolation and so on. And finally, we come back to the old National Health and Wellbeing Outcome number 6, which says that basically carers should live a normal life. But we believe that there should be a paradigm shift and that power should be moving down to communities, to social care users and to carers. That's it. Thank you for listening. So I think we've got some questions via Claire.
That's great. Thanks very much, Peter. So at our last meeting, we also pulled together the questions that we wanted to ask you, Derek. But I thought before I'll ask the first question, I'll give you the opportunity to come back. Is there anything you want to say about the presentation, the information you've just been given?
It would be good to get the slides if you would be willing to share them.
Yeah,
I was taking notes, but I probably didn't capture all of them. That would be really helpful. There was, no, I think the presentation was clear. I recognise many of the issues. I agree that carers are indispensable and experts. I'd love to pursue with you some of the issues around carers and their human rights. I think to date we've been very much focused on the human rights of the people who use services and perhaps not so much on the human rights of carers. So that would be a good area for us to explore if that was okay with you. Perhaps also to talk a bit about the access to complaints and redress. I think you might need something snappier than off care. I think the principle is a really interesting one, and it would be good to have a conversation about that. But happy to spend the time, Claire, as you and the other members of the forum would want to spend it.
Thanks very much, Derek, and I'm glad you picked up on those points. We'll be happy to pursue them with you. I know we've got another couple of meetings in the diary with you with different groups, but we can do it outside of that as well. So I'm going to go on to the questions, actually. So the first question, I think it's a question you probably asked yourself before you took on this job, and it's about the scale of the task and the complexity of the social care system. Is it possible to complete the review and take a radical approach in the recommendations you make in the time scale you've got? And then just a question, we've been asking for an independent review since 2016, so why is it so rushed? Why is it so short?
So I think it's possible. I wouldn't have taken it on if I thought it wasn't possible. There's no denying, Claire, that it's a tight time scale, and if I'd had more of a kind of choice in the matter, maybe I would have asked for more time. However, on the other hand, I think we'll never get, at least not in the foreseeable future, a better opportunity than this one to actually make some radical change. I think there is receptivity. I think it existed before the pandemic, but it certainly exists now, We're at the right time in the political cycle. The political parties are getting geared up for next year's Scottish Parliament elections. They'll all want to say something about social care in their manifestos. This piece of work that we're doing gives them an opportunity to say something that's informed and that is based on the needs, rights and preferences of people who use services, their carers and their families, which I think is really important. That ought to be the outcome that we're all seeking. And so, you know, we're going to have to just trade off some time for doing this at an opportune moment. There's also, as you said, these issues are not new. We've been talking about these kind of things for quite a long time. There's a lot of analysis on which we can draw. To some extent, the fact that I only have a few months means I can't redo any of that. I think that would not be a good use of our time anyway. We should just stand on the shoulders of all of the good work that's been done and try and focus our energies on creating something that everybody can get behind and that is both ambitious and implementable. And so I think we have enough time. It's tight, and I think in terms of where it falls in the political and parliamentary landscape, actually it's a good time. There's a receptivity that we just have to take advantage of.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm very glad to hear you using words like, you know, ambitious and radical, because I think there's an appetite for that, certainly from the carers movement. I take your point about the opportune timescale as well. So the next question I've got for you, it's something you slightly covered in our AGM, but just to kind of maybe take it a bit further. We know from that you're still gathering evidence and everything's on the table, and you are able to put forward recommendations that require more funding, that have a cost attached to them. So what are the different funding options available, but more importantly, what do you think is the most viable and fair option to adequately fund social care?
So just to restate that we haven't been given any kind of funding envelope or limit within which to work. And if our conversations, our examination, our intelligence gathering tells us that investment in social care is required, then that's what we'll recommend. I don't have any qualms about doing that. I would want us to recommend on that basis, however. I'd want us to recommend in terms of investment. Because actually, I think one of the challenges that we have around funding, and maybe even broader than that, is that social care is looked at through a lens of crises and burden. And I think it's time to change the conversation. Actually, I think that an investment in social care is a good investment. It makes sense in economic development terms. It makes sense in citizenship terms. It's just a good thing for us to be investing in, and so I'd like to frame it on in that way. A couple of other things. We need to make sure that the money that's already in the system is being well spent. We need to look at how that money is currently distributed, and some of those mechanisms, I think, for distribution, like the way in which we're doing commissioning and procurement, I think it's time we overhauled some of those. It's time we rethought how we do some of those things. I think some of what ought to be a flagship in Scotland around self-directed support, and in particular one part of that around direct payments, could be enhanced, should be enhanced. So is there a way of making it easier for people to manage their own funds, and equipping them to give effect to their rights through that kind of mechanism? I think there are some opportunities there. I meant what I said earlier. I agree with Peter's point about carers are indispensable, and I'm entirely conscious of the fact that not only are carers indispensable, they're also human beings, and therefore they need some time off like the rest of us. And so, if you know, that's an investment I think we ought to make, and I would look to your help to frame and shape that, to create that compelling case for that to be part of the investment. So yeah, you know, and I also think there's something about keeping them, taking the market out of social care, and making it much more collaborative. We ought to be able to have these conversations on an ongoing basis about how are we spending the money. I think that goes to the point that Peter made about the voice of carers and indeed of service users in the governance structures. And so I think we will have something to say about that. We are trying as best we can to hear voices in this phase of creating the report. But that's necessary but not sufficient. And so I think we have to describe a way for those voices to be heard in the implementation and in the delivery and in the oversight of whatever social care system we describe. So those are just a few kind of preliminary thoughts, Claire, about how we should see any call for additional funding, i.e. as an investment, not to shore up the existing system, but to invest in something that is more likely to meet the needs, rights and preferences of people who are in the system. And also think an opportunity here for us to change some of the way in which the money is distributed, so that it can be done so in a way that's understandable, in a way that people can be held to account for, in a way that's a bit more transparent than the status quo.
Thanks for that. You're getting a lot of agreements in the chat box. I'm just going to read out a few for you. Simplify the SDS process and allow carers to be the commissioners of their own support. I think Derek makes a really good point regarding the reframing of social care as an investment. I agree, especially the points about how money is spent by councils, and a few others as well, but I think kind of broad agreement in terms of trying to maybe shift some of the power directly to where it makes the most difference to people, if I can sum it up maybe in that way. You know, that's been really helpful. I'm going to move on to the next question, and it's about the involvement of carers from how to reach groups. I know that you're meeting with carers from various different groups across Scotland, and we talked last time at the AGM about carers who maybe weren't digitally included. Another group that's quite difficult to reach sometimes are carers from BME communities. So I'm wondering if you've got anybody representing BME communities on your expert group, or whether you're connecting with those groups as you're doing your kind of listening period of the review.
Yeah, so we don't have someone with a BAME background on the expert panel. We are having, we're using the good offices of the Alliance to create a series of meetings, one of which has been with carers, but we are having one, I think it's next week, that is specifically geared towards hearing the voices of BAME people and communities. So that's scheduled, I think it's Wednesday or Thursday of next week. I can confirm the date if that would be helpful. The other group I'm conscious that we haven't, I think, accessed well are young carers. And while I'm hoping that the event we're doing at the Carers Parliament will get us some access to that group, I think that's a gap still clear that I'd like us to fill. Again, if you can help us to access young carers, I'd be really interested in doing that.
Yeah, we in the coalition, we don't work with young carers, but certainly my colleague in the Young Carers Alliance does. So I'm happy to, speak to him. I'm sure he could set something up, Derek. That shouldn't be a problem. And similarly, we've got our networks of BME carers. We've got good links with some groups, so we'll make sure they know about the meeting next week as well. Try and get some good representation. I'm going to stick with the theme of care representation just for another question, and you'll know there's some disappointment that there isn't a care on the expert group, and we talked about that at the AGM, so I'm not going to ask you that question again. But when it comes to the point where you're discussing and agreeing the draft recommendations, can you make a commitment to carer proof them? I think they need to be tested with carers, because quite often what is good for some sectors, like the workforce, there can be a knock-on effect and unintended consequences for carers. So I wonder if you'd be able to do that, just to make a commitment to run it past groups of carers, just to make sure they're carer proof.
Sure. I'm just checking I didn't go back on mute. I've got a habit of doing that. So again, just in case there was anyone who wasn't at the AGM, we don't have a representative of carers on the advisory panel, but more than half of us have had caring, or currently have or have had caring responsibilities ourselves, including me. And I'll do a deal with you. If you'll agree to carer proof what we come up with, I'll agree to come back and at least run some of these ideas past you. I think what I can't commit to do, given I'm commissioned to do this report, is kind of share the report with you. But what I can certainly do, and this is probably more helpful before the report is finalised, is share some emerging ideas and thoughts and things that are likely to find their way into the report. And if you would be willing to carer proof me, then for me, for us, I would be very happy to come back and do that.
That's really welcome. I mean, there's I suppose a few ways we can do that. We can certainly bring it back to this group who have such great links locally to the IJBs, and also the national care organisations is potentially another route. But no, that would be very welcome. Thank you, because as you'll know, we do want kind of some good recommendations around things like the workforce. But as I said, sometimes when you direct resources to the workforce, an example of that might be the overnight payments changing, which actually reduced some of the provision because money went towards the salary, which everybody agreed with. But it did mean that the knock-on effect was carers having to care more to make up for that. So sometimes there is that unintended consequence, which we need to pick up on. So thank you for that. So I know you've been meeting carers from various groups and you've got some more in the diary. I suppose what I'd be interested to hear so far, what's your understanding of the needs of unpaid carers, but in particular, the deficits in the system that impact on carers in particular? Have you got a sense at the moment on what those are and how they can be addressed?
So I think they are quite, from what I've heard so far, and I wouldn't pretend to be as expert in this territory as you are, so I'd love to hear your perspectives on this. But there's a wide range of things. Some of them are about values and culture and feeling feeling valued, and I'm fairly sure we could all agree that the value that's placed on unpaid caring doesn't add up to £36 billion currently. But there's something I think that's deeper than that. It is about recognition of that expertise and indispensability. I hear from people. It's about a challenge in having allies in the system who will amplify the voice. It's about, I think, a strong desire I hear from carers to be partners in social care, and a challenge in getting around the right tables to enable that to happen. I think you folks on the call are probably the exception rather than the rule there, as far as that's concerned, given your role in relation to the IJBs. So I think there's a set of cultural, values-based and behavioural issues there, Claire, that I have heard and I take on board. And then there's a set of more kind of practical and structural things, like respite, like a kind of frustration about having to kind of fight and battle for everything in a system that's supposed to be designed differently. A challenge in navigating through some of the complexities on behalf of the person who's being cared for. So those are the things I think that are uppermost in my mind right now. I think we need to find a way in this process of properly recognising the indispensable expertise of carers, and we need to find a way of making it easier for people to not just survive in the system, but to thrive in the system. And those are the messages I've heard loudest so far. And my job here is to listen. So if I'm missing anything, opportunity now for you to add or challenge anything that I've said.
Thanks, Derek. I was just going to suggest, actually, Jenny's been covering the chat. She's going to give a summary and pull out some of those comments, and then I think maybe we'll see if anybody else wants to come in, particularly around this idea of does that cover everything, do you think, that Derek's mentioned, or are there other deficits in the system or ways in which the system could work better for carers that you'd like to highlight? So we'll go to Jenny first, but then we'll take some comments if people want to have a think.
See, Peter, you've got your hand up, so we'll come to you after. So definitely approval for the idea of bringing emerging ideas in preparation for the report back to the group in order to be care approved. Lots of nods and comments around that. And then a couple of comments relating to partnership. So working in partnership with carers gets the best outcome for the cared. For however, this can be a challenge as carers don't feel listened to. Partnership and collaborative working is a great way forward, as no one person has all the answers. So Peter had his hand raised. I don't know if you want to come in at this point, Peter.
Yeah, it was addressing the difficulties that carers face, some of the frustrations we face. Could you also have a look at the waiving of charges? The guidance from the Scottish Government is impenetrable. It's been interpreted 50 different ways by 30 different IJBs. And it seems grossly unfair because we get charged for being ill if we're not careful. So if I break my leg and have to go into hospital overnight, I get charged for my person being looked after, which I say seems grossly unfair. So I think that's something that I appreciate you having a look at.
Can we take another question and then maybe go back to Derek with both of them at the same time, or another comment?
So Mona has her hand raised there, so if you want to come in.
You're muted, Maura.
Thank you. Yes, I know. I wasn't sure if my hand was actually, I'd raised it, but I couldn't actually see it on my own screen. One of the frustrations that, that I've mentioned before is really to do with the lack of integration between social care and the NHS, and the fact that there is very often still money wasting and time wasting duplication of services, so that carers find themselves answering the same questions twice, filling in the same forms twice for a particular need. And I mean, that is something that really has to be sorted out if anything is going to improve.
Do you want to come back on those two, Derek? So waiving charges and endless assessments, I think, covers Morna's.
Sure, I will certainly take a look at the existing guidance around the waiving of charges, and we'll examine that. I think it's part of a broader issue around what we charge for and what we expect people to make contributions to in social care. But Peter, we can definitely take a look at that. Morna's point about the lack of integration, I suppose, I was the Director General for Health and Social Care when that legislation was passed. I should accept some of the responsibility for the lack of joined upness that you're experiencing, Morna. The more I look at this, the more I think that it's not a structural problem. We've tried to solve that integration problem in a whole range of ways, and ultimately we resorted to legislation to solve it. But unless people really want to work together and are willing to work together, all of the structural and organisational changes for naught, really. And I think the way that Peter raised this point in his presentation as well, that a kind of basic requirement of that is that people are able to share data that you give them permission to share, and that seems just to be unnecessarily challenging for us, and people will blame all sorts of things, from their IT systems to data protection and all of those kind of things. But a lot of that duplication, Morna, I think, could be solved just by people being willing to share data that you expressly allow them to share. And again, we can make some recommendations about that too.
Thanks, Derek.
So Anne, you had your hand raised, and also Francis. So if we can bring Anne in first, if you want to unmute yourself.
One of the things, Derek, I wondered about, I know it's a very short time scale, so you can't look at everything, but we have carers who work and are not really getting any support if they need time off. They have to take holidays, or they have to take unpaid leave. Is there anything can be done about that?
Shall we take Francis's question and then you can take both together?
I've got a couple on that. If we go to direct payment become a real failure because people happen to have guardianship and everything. Where you've got self-direct support, you can use the option that the council actually does the accounts for you. But it doesn't seem to be take up as much as what they really want it to be. And can I go into the question between social care and the health board? There seems to be still that kind of no partnership real between the two of them, because when somebody needs a piece of equipment, when a physiotherapist or whoever says they definitely need a new piece of equipment, they have to wait, go to the other side, the social worker, but the health board to find the money, and that it takes a long time to turn around and actually get the piece of equipment they actually require. And to me, that's kind of wrong. Because if it's a replacement equipment, then it should be more or less up and straight and running. If you're, other than you're going to wait a couple of months to turn around and get the piece of equipment that's to replace that you can't use, if you understand where I'm coming from on that one.
Thanks, Derek. Do you mind picking up on those together?
Sure. So I mean, that's I think another good example of where a kind of true willingness to work together would help us give people what they want and need. I'm actually, my conversation immediately after this one is with the health board chief executives, and the main thing I want to talk to them about is about integration, and why is it that it seems to be significantly more advanced in some parts of the country than it is in others. And there's a handful of places, I think, where it's most of what we hoped it would be, and it's still a challenge in some other geographies. The working carers question, it's the first time that specific one has come up, so I'm not very familiar with the issues there. I'll make myself familiar. My gut reaction is that if we are able to make some recommendation about the rights of carers, and that rights-based approach includes a right to some time off and cover for that time off, that should apply to all carers. Mm-hmm. All unpaid carers.
Unpaid carers, yeah.
Yes.
The way we like to look at that particular issue, Derek, is to compare it to childcare. So there's been a massive investment in childcare over recent years, quite rightly, to encourage parents and allow them to be economically active. And we think there should be parity, because particularly women are disadvantaged through caring roles and in the workplace. And to enable them to return to work or to continue working, very often it's that replacement care that they need. So we think there should be a similar investment in replacement care for working carers, because so many carers, 1 in 3 carers, end up giving up work to care. So it's a huge number. But that's maybe something, if you can look in further, we're happy to give you more information on that.
Yeah.
That would be
Well, please don't hesitate to send anything that you feel would be helpful to us.
Thank you. We're going to take one more, and then I'll go back to some of the questions that were given to us in advance. But I think Shabana wants to come in.
Hi. So the review of social care, I mean, obviously it's framed as a review of social care, but the issues that many of us face aren't limited to just social care, if that makes sense. So I wondered whether there was scope within the review to also look at some of the other factors and, I suppose, areas that sort of interface with social care and also impact. So for example, I'm thinking of education. So if we don't get the education aspect of it right, the impact then falls on a lot of parent carers and paid carers, who are then left dealing with the fallout of educational support not being there. I'm also thinking about housing. So if we haven't got accessible housing, if we aren't getting the adaptations in place, I think as was it, Francis, so one of the other carers just mentioned there, you know, we're not getting that aspect of it right. Obviously the impact is then falling upon the social care again. We've also got things around making our communities more accessible. So although that's probably out with the remit of social care itself, but actually, you know, you talked about social care being an investment, you know, we need to think about how are we going to be investing in our communities to make them more accessible. So in terms of how do people access shopping, how do they access the leisure facilities, etc. How do we make more changing place toilets, etc. So that although none of that sits directly within the remit of social care, every single one of those aspects impacts on the quality of life of the people that we care for, and therefore the quality of life that we experience as well. And just to add to that, also the employment aspect of it as well, again, probably falls out with the remit, but there's probably some really specific measures that could be taken around, firstly, how do we ensure local authorities and health boards themselves are care positive employers? So how do we ensure that employment opportunities are made more flexible so that some of us around here can continue to manage our caring roles along with sort of our careers and our working roles as well. So it's a bit long-winded, but
and it's a great question. And Shabana, not only is there an opportunity to look at these things within the remit, there's a requirement. The remit's actually quite specific about those things. So it requires me to, I'll just read from it if that's okay. It requires me to make recommendations on social care and healthcare service models and their interaction with other services such as housing, education and employment. So I'm required to consider those things. I'm also required to consider the role of local communities in providing capacity and assets to support people to live as well and as independently as possible, and to enjoy the same facilities, services and opportunities as other citizens. So yeah, I agree with you. Those are essential parts of the broader social care system, and yeah, we're required to examine them and make some recommendations on them.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to one of the questions that was submitted in advance, and it's about the National Care Service. So there's a lot of interest around this, and we're just wondering, I know there's no decisions been made yet about it or what form it would take if it was decided as a recommendation. But a question, and you would expect this from care reps and IJBs, if you have a National Care Service and a National Health Service, two large separate bodies with parity, which we would welcome, it's an attractive proposition, but where would it leave integration and integration authorities?
Well, we haven't quite worked that out as yet, as you quite rightly say. There's clearly a lot of political capital being invested in this idea of a National Care Service. It actually does not appear in my terms of reference. I'm not, despite what you read in the newspapers, I'm not required to come up with recommendations about a National Care Service, but it's also very clear that the current government, and I think any potential future government, will want to be creating a National Care Service. So I see it as our job to come up with a set of recommendations for what might be done nationally. And there are, I think there are some things that we can and should do nationally. I think we should have nationally agreed outcomes for social care that go right across the whole country. I think we should have national standards that apply across the whole country. I think we should have a way to harvest best practice and have it applied nationally, a way to learn together on a national basis. I think there are already pieces of national contracting, etc., that probably continue to make sense. There's a range of things I think that we can and should just do once for Scotland. However, at the same time, social care is a very kind of individualised thing, especially if you start, as we're starting, with the needs, rights and preferences of people who use services and their carers and families. Those are particular to every individual. They need to be highly customised to the needs of that individual. And so it's hard to see some of that nationally delivered. And so there's going to have to be some kind of balance between local delivery and national strategy. I mean, the other thing I think that can and should be part of what's done nationally is national data, because when I look at when I did the job as the Director General for Health and Social Care, when I looked at the data I had to make decisions in the healthcare world, it was much more complete at a national level than anything I ever had to work with on social care. And so I think there are some opportunities around that too. And so we are going to have to figure out over the course of the next few months what needs to be done at a national level that should be within the remit of any national care service. And I've given a few ideas for what those things might be. And then how does that national care service relate to the range of organisations that currently deliver social care? Not just local authorities, but also third sector organisations, independent sector organisations, etc., etc. We're really trying hard, Claire, and it's not as if you can just put these things into 3 separate boxes, but we're really trying hard to do the work in 3 kind of connected phases. So that this first phase is listening to people who use services, people who work in social care, paid and unpaid. Then, having done that, we'll think about, so if that's what these people tell us about needs, rights and preferences, what's the ideal system to deliver that? And then to think about funding and governance and administration and delivery and regulation and all of those things that need to sit around any kind of care system. So the fundamental thing for us is let's deeply understand what it is that people need and are entitled to, and let's build it out from there. So I don't want to start from the end of the telescope that says National Care Service. I want to start from the end of the telescope that says that is in these kind of conversations, and I'll figure out how a National Care Service can deliver that in due course.
I think that's very reassuring. There's been a lot of debates around this, as you'll imagine, with colleagues, and I think they would welcome any move towards greater consistency. That's something we spend a lot of time talking about in the Carers Collaborative, all the different experiences across Scotland, and the idea of a framework which has principles and rights and quality standards embedded in it. But on the flip side of this, I suppose anything that would centralise power too much and not shift power towards communities and service users and carers would not be welcomed in the same way. And any idea of having services come in-house, which I know is perhaps one model of thinking in terms of a national care service, but we welcome that you're doing it that way around and you're starting off with people's outcomes and what works for them in the first instance. There's a lot of people wanting to come in at this point. I know we don't have a lot of time, so maybe we'll just take a couple of comments from people, and then if Jenny can do a roundup, that would be really good.
So I think Fiona was first, and then if we can bring Peter in, that would be great.
Hi, Jenny, thanks. Hello, Derek. I think what you're saying is absolutely true, and very often the support's not person-centred. And also what I find is very often the person who's cared for is not at the heart of support. So families have really got to settle for what's available in their local areas, and often it's a postcode lottery. And I think that's a good way forward if it's actually person-centred support with the person at the heart of what they need rather than what's available, or what they're told is available is another battle for many families. It's not until you start digging a wee bit deeper to say, oh, this is available, or how can access this for, for the people's loved ones. I gave a wee speech at the National Autism Conference on advocacy, and that was something we felt in Renfrewshire, that carers didn't actually have a voice. They didn't even know advocacy was available, and within just 4 to 5 weeks of training, there was a remarkable improvement in partnership working. It was quite amazing to watch the carers be empowered, and that was just a very small, short space. It was a 10-week programme. The feedback we had, and now people are working closely with schools, been able to go into meetings which they were petrified to attend before, just feeling confident, probably challenging people in authority that they wouldn't have done before. And what we were trying to say was partnership is definitely the way forward. And I would say most parent carers really want to work in partnership. It's an awful lot of the professionals. It's almost like a kind of power, and that's what the feedback we get very often.
Thanks. I think maybe we just have enough time for if Jenny can do a roundup, and I've got one more person waiting, and then we'll go back to you, Derek, just for some last words, if that's okay. We'll try and stick to time.
So lots of comments echoing Fiona's comments about person-centred being key. I agree that it should be person-centred support for every individual. That's part of the issue that families face. Person-centred is where everything needs to start in order to achieve better social care. Comments on leadership as well. So what I find is that senior leadership team and people on the ground are willing to make radical changes. A lot of this has been seen because of COVID, but the stalling point is middle management. And comments as well about working carers. So the impact of carer positive could be reviewed to see where there has and hasn't been positive influence on working carers across Scotland.
Thank you. Do you want to say a few words to that, Derek? And then I think we're probably out of time.
I mean, I can only do, all I can say in relation to Fiona's point is I agree with everything you said. That's why we're trying to do it in the way in which we're doing it. And I'm conscious of the fact that having that person-centred care within a national system poses some challenges, but the current state's not giving us what we need and want either. And I think some kind of consistency and a fairer approach across the whole country could well be achieved by some kind of national arrangements. And so I don't think, I saw Peter's comment about person-centred versus national service. I don't think that needs to be, I don't think it needs to be one or the other. I think it's possible to design something that's both, that both brings the positive aspects of a national care system around constancy of purpose, common standards, an opportunity for us to learn across a whole country with the very individualised care that people need, want, and are entitled to. And that's the puzzle that we'll try and solve, is how do you do that? And then the final words I would say, Claire, are just thank you. It's been an incredibly valuable hour for me. I've really appreciated having your insights and hearing your perspectives. As I said at the start, I'd love to see the slides, and if you could share the chat, that would also be incredibly valuable to us. So thank you very much.
Thanks again, Derek, and it's good to know that we will be having further conversations with you, and also as you committed to letting us see some of the early insights, that's really good, and we're very pleased about that. So I'll send that information on to you, and yep, thank you very much for your time today. That's been really, really useful.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter's asked if people to stay for a couple of minutes. Do people want to stay for a couple of minutes?
Yep.
Yes.
Do you want to stop recording, Jenny? Thanks.